Let's look at an interface example. In the Interfaces project in the Core Programming in Use folder, let's take a look at interfaces. We know what they are. We've talked about them. This interface keyword is going to define the interface, interface 1. One method is going to be in this interface. That means that this is the contract, and anything that derives from this interface is going to need to implement my function at the minimum. Same thing with interface 2. If we had both of these uncommented here, then anything that derives from this is going to need to implement my function and my function 2, and also do it with the parameter list. As you can see, that's going to be very, very important. So, my class here, see my class 1, derives means it inherits from interface 1, and the comma separated list of interfaces for multiple inheritance. You'll see inheritance and all that great stuff coming up in the object-oriented section. And then you see the implementation of my function. You have to do this. Otherwise, it's not going to work. It's not going to compile. We have to do this. We're going to get errors if this doesn't happen. Alright, so see my class 2. Same thing. Multiple inheritance, comma separated list of interfaces, colon to derive it. And you can see that this is going to implement my function and my function again. But it does something different. It's doing interface 1 here and interface 2 because the interfaces both use the same name. And you can see that if we get rid of this, I wrote some notes. The public keyword is not allowed on an explicit interface declaration. Notice that we don't have public here. So you have to get rid of the public keyword or you're going to get an error. Here we have public because we're not actually being very specific about what interface we're working with. By getting really specific using the dot notation for interface 1 and interface 2, then you can see, we know who we are. I know who I am here. We know what interface is which. But otherwise, this one implements my function, which is for both of the interfaces. They both have the same name. A little bit tricky, a little bit wacky, just to show you that this does work, this does happen. Interfaces can have the same function names, and then you have to implement them. You can implement them one at a time, as you see with See My Class 2, or you can implement them all together with one function call, if you know that they're going to be similar. So if interfaces actually have the same methods associated inside the interface, you do have to implement it, but you just need to do one, and then that's just going to work for both of them. Otherwise, you can use this syntax with the dot notation to be specific about your implementation of the interface methods. So hopefully that's clear. It should be very clear because that's an important thing you need to understand. You're implementing the interface. You're implementing the method for that interface. And if they have the same name, then either be specific because you want to do both, or don't be specific and then just do one. Maybe it's a print functionality and you just want to have one print function for both of them. Alright, so here's how we're going to be working with them. The first one, working with class, same thing, instantiating a class as usual. Now we have an interface here. This is just a type variable, and to get at just interface 1, well, we have to cast the type as usual, and then you can actually get the interface, and then you can see what's exposed by that particular interface. So you can use them like any other type. Normally you would use them in with the class, but you could get used to working with them just as interfaces. Just work with the interface that you need to work with to use the functionality of that interface, especially if the names overlap. But it doesn't matter when you actually implement it. So it's up to you. But that's how you would work with it. I1, my function, you can see now that this is going to output that to the console, both of these. And since they both are using that same function, that same method in that class, then it's not going to be able to distinguish between the two. We'll just take a quick peek at that. And you see, okay, well, who am I? I don't know who I am because we're using the first class. The second class, alright, that's better. I know who I am, and this one as well. And that toString is going to actually let you know what we're working with here. Interfaces.see my class 1 and see my class 2. You'll see this when we look at the object later on in the object-oriented programming. So that second one's pretty clear too, except we're working with this specific interface and that specific method that's going to be specifically referenced above, as we saw. It's referenced. We can see that we're getting very specific about which interface we want. As so. Remember, no public keyword. And then that's going to allow us to actually know who we are, because it's going to get to that method, specific method that was created just to deal with that particular interface. It's hard-coded.